Hey folks, Matt Easton here, scholagladiatoria and
Lucy Easton.
So it's really hot today. It's been like 29-30 degrees, which in England is freaking hot, and we're not used to it. So if I look shiny and sweaty, that's the reason why, in case you were wondering. So we were talking about the fact that for the most part, people who do martial arts, including HEMA, but all martial arts, most people, unless you're in like the security industry or military or something like that, most people aren't actually gonna fight in to the death combat. They might fight in sporting combat, yeah, but it's a completely different mindset. And you know, I don't need to bang on about this. You'll realise this, okay? But so I was thinking, Lucy, if Lucy had to fight tomorrow with swords, for example, then would the fact that her opponent is more likely to be a male and potentially stronger on average, how would that dictate what weapon you chose? And so, well.
So, to break the scenario down, I have to fight someone. I am armed. Weapon of my choice.
Yeah.
And we're assuming that they're a big, strong man.
Well, I would say, let's say an average man. Let's say me. Okay, so I am Mr. Average. No. So not me. That would be a weird scenario, wouldn't it?
Yeah, we're going to ignore that scenario.
Just a legal disclaimer. We're not intending to do that, and that will never happen. And if anything like that happens...
If it does, we'll film it.
I didn't plan it, she didn't plan it, there was no premeditation. But let's say it's, you know, I'm pretty much, I think I'm kind of roughly average strength. Maybe I'm slightly above average because I do some things and lots of people don't. I don't know. I'm talking about not someone who's like a bodybuilder, but you know, you use swords regularly, I use swords regularly. But we're not actually trying to kill people, we're not having people trying to kill us. And I guess where this stems from is I like the feeling of big meaty weapons in my hand. Particularly, you know, for example, if we take sabres, yeah. So this sabre here is lighter than that sabre. That sabre is a cavalry sabre, and that sabre is a foot artillery sabre. For that reason, there's a weight difference and a balance difference in them. And one sword's a lot more nimble than the other. Now, I prefer the feeling of the big meaty weapon in my hand, but if I had to fight, like tomorrow, a duel, for example, one-on-one, I'd pick the lighter weapon because it's handier and quicker. Now, if you compare our forearms, show us your forearm, Lucy, there's not a huge difference because I'm fairly skinny, and Lucy's fairly skinny as well, but Lucy's fairly strong for a female, and I'm kind of average for a male.
This is a weird shot. Yeah. What is the internet going to do to that shot?
But
section removed.
But the point is that forearms, where certainly in sabre and I'd say backsword and lots of other styles, sword and buckler as well, I'd argue, side sword, rapier as well, most sword styles, shall we say, except maybe for longsword. A lot of, you know, forearm strength is something you don't use very much in everyday life, but it's incredibly important to swords. And I've noticed that people who are either less used to doing sword stuff or product placement there, or we'll blur that out. No, we won't, because I never edit anything.
What are you saying?
Yeah, maybe I'll get Lindy Beige to help edit that out. Or Metatron. But what was the point I was making? Yes. I've noticed that people who don't have, you know, kind of really exercised forearms or particularly strong arms, their arms get tired quicker, and I would advise them to use a lighter sword. It's a bit like if you're doing archery, you might be able to pull a 70-pound drawweight longbow, but if you can only shoot it 5 times and then you're too tired to pull it again, then you're probably better off practicing with a 50-pound bow until you get a bit stronger. Because clearly that's going to be more effective. And it's the same thing with a sword. If you can move quickly and fight, you know, for longer, although a fight with swords might not be very long, but if you can move more quickly and more effectively, it's going to be better. What do you think?
So that's your opinion?
Yeah.
You think that if I was to fight someone who was an exact match of you physically, but not you,
but not
tomorrow,
me, someone else,
not him, that I should use a lighter, smaller weapon? than you in order to be able to sustain the amount of time. Is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying smaller necessarily, but I think.
But in order for it to be lighter, it would have to, in some dimensions, be smaller.
If I was asked to buy a sword for you, so if we're if we're captured by futuristic Nazi scientists.
Do you have the zombie sword that I was looking at yesterday? Yeah, that one.
Right, okay, so this is interesting.
It's not a zombie, that's a terribly unhistorical way of explaining
Lucy
this.
thinks that the fairly light
Were zombies to attack tomorrow?
So think of it like a mini sabre. So it
weighs nothing.
It's really
so light.
So this is an 18th century, probably I think about mid 18th century officer's hanger, possibly naval, and it is light. It's essentially like the weight of a spadroon. We know how much we love spadroons, right?
I love spadroons. Can I just interject that?
Don't. She's joking.
I really like them.
But it's like the weight of the spadroon, but in a sexier shape, I would say. And it looks a bit like the archetypal pirate sword, doesn't it?
I don't know how well you can see that.
But yeah, so in a home you took my eye out. In a home defence situation, that's the point. It's kind of like
we've completely digressed.
But that's great because we're examining even more things. You're getting more bang for your buck here than we originally thought you would. The point is that we're going deep now.
Deeper than
Are you ready for it? So the point is that when you talk about like a home defense, a self-defense situation or a home invasion situation, people think a little bit more realistically than they do about the fantasy scenario of having to fight a duel, which is most modern people can't relate to as much. So if you think about it in those terms, if tomorrow you were going to suffer from a home invasion from someone who was holding a sword, obviously, not a gun.
Were there a home invasion into our home, I would call the police and do nothing else.
Obviously, unless you were in fear of your life, and then you are legally entitled to protect
I would
yourself.
call the police and do nothing else.
Yeah, that's true. We would hide and run and tell. But if you imagine other people, perhaps in another country with different legal framework, and they were going to defend
We'd have
themselves.
guns, man. That would be so different.
But let's say that the intruder doesn't have a gun and you don't have a gun for whatever reason.
We should totally go back to what we were talking about before.
Yeah. Right. So I think so. If I was asked to pick a weapon for you, if I knew you were going to fight Pedro, our friend Pedro.
That's really helpful to all of you watching who've all obviously met Pedro.
Yeah, anyway, if she was going to fight...
If I was going to fight Pedro...
If she was going to fight Pedro tomorrow and I had to pick the sword for her, first of all, I would make sure it was super sharp, because that's really important, actually, and don't underestimate how important it is to make sure a sword is kept absolutely super sharp, and lots of cultures throughout history have spent huge amounts of time honing their edges to make sure they're as sharp as possible. So I'd make sure it was super sharp for you. I would want something with good hand protection, because I know the styles that Lucy practices are not utterly dependent, but it's quite important to have good hand protection. So it'd be a sabre or a backsword, something like that. But I would want you to have a long, sharp blade, and I know you like thrusting quite a lot. So I'd want you to have quite a nimble, quite light at the tip. I wouldn't give you a falchion, because I think I just don't think that you would function well with a falchion against Pedro.
Firstly,
yeah,
you should cut and thrust in equal measure.
Yeah.
So you should cut and thrust about approximately the same, and I don't
This is George
favour thrusting over cutting. I mean, I actually don't.
No.
If you're going to spar me tomorrow, yeah, I do, but I don't. But, so if I was to spar someone who is physically bigger and stronger than me, and we can safely assume that despite the fact that I'm fairly physically fit and I do a bit of weights and hold a lot of swords,
and you're tall. Lucy's
I'm 5'10", so I am. I'm average height for a man.
6'5". No, I'm not. I'm 6'1".
Yes.
I wish I was 6. Do I wish I was 6? No, I don't wish I was 6'5". I think perfect height for a man is about 6'2", 6'3", but no, 6'5" is too much.
I think it's 6'1".
All people who are really tall seem to have back pains. Let's get back to the point. Right. Yep.
We're not even drinking port this time.
Although we're planning to after this. Oh, I am.
I have to go up at 5:30. But yeah.
Anyway, carry on.
So, if I was... so you can assume that most men that I'll be fighting and most men that I spar with are stronger than I am. And I think that it has a lot of relevance when you're doing sort of several bouts in an evening, or when you're sparring for quite a long time, because I do think in general, I don't have papers to back this up, but I think that men probably have better stamina. And if I have a lighter sword, then it makes it easier for me to match it. But the problem is that in order to have a sword that's lighter for me to use, I have to be giving up something in terms of the sword itself. And when I'm sparring, especially we've got some quite big blokes in my club, and when I'm sparring them,
big in height,
they're what else could I possibly have been describing with that?
Yes, yeah. So,
we have some tall, heavy set chaps, some strapping young men
Our
in
club
the club,
is full of strapping men,
and they are matched most of the time in the weapons that we're using, and they can hit quite hard, and that's something that through technique most of the time I can deal with okay. But if they were hitting, I suspect, as hard as they can, if they were that sort of fencer, not like a big go for it fencer rather than a technique fencer, that I would put myself at even more of a disadvantage by having a sword that was lighter than their sword.
See, I see it the other way around. I see it as like, why fight fire with fire? If the opponent is better at being big, strong and powerful, why try and be is equally big, strong and powerful?
But that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying it's in terms of thinking defensively. So whereas you're working differently, so when someone's bigger and stronger than you and they're sort of being more of the aggressor in the fight, you absolutely need to play your own game and not be as good at their game as they are.
And remember always, with swords, unarmoured sword fighting comes down predominantly to skill. Comes predominantly down to technique.
But fitness matters, and strength is relevant to that.
Height, I would actually say that in most of the sword styles I've ever practiced, height and reach is more important than strength or weight or whatever. Reach is really important. I mean, you've got good reach. You're lucky because you're tall and you've got long gibbon arms, a bit like I have.
Thanks.
Well, I'm a charmer. But clearly being able to reach far and step far is very advantageous, especially in one-handed sword styles, and always unarmoured. Armoured fighting, completely different. It's more like wrestling. So, I think that... So, you saying you'd pick quite a heavy-hitting sword?
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Right.
I'm saying that there are drawbacks to picking a lighter one, and it would depend on who I was fighting and the nature of the fight, which sword that I would pick. If I was fighting Pedro, who is a technique man... He's very he's a clean fencer. He's not
basically
he's not a bully.
This video is about Pedro, isn't it? This is a video about
shout out to Pedro.
Yeah.
So if I was fighting Pedro specifically, I would use a lighter sword, I would
use a small sword against Pedro though. He's very good at small sword.
If I'm honest, I'd probably lose because Pedro's really, really, really good, and I'm merely slightly good. But
yeah, Pedro's good.
but yeah.
So as an example as well, so going back to a point that Lucy made about a minute ago, was about I think was about there are disadvantages to picking the lighter quick sword. Definitely. Example, small sword, yes, whilst you can get hits on really quickly and easily with a small sword, obviously this is thrust only, but whether it's a small sword or a spadroon, something else that's really quick, it's actually harder to put solid defences in against someone who's using a heavier sword. So if someone was using a cavalry sabre or a big sort of Highland basket hilt broadsword or a longsword or something like that, defending with the small sword, it's not going to break, it's not going to snap probably, like some people on the internet seem to think that these are made of paper or something. It's still a bar of steel, but it is harder to defend against heavy objects with light objects, and there are various fencing treatises that state this. So yeah, absolutely, when you pick the lighter weapon you are giving up certain things, and of course if it's a cutting weapon that's lighter at the tip, you hit less effectively. So even if you hit someone, the cut very often is not going to do as much damage to them, so the fight might go on for longer. You might have to chop them a few times to disable them, whereas if you use a falchion, most people, if you chop them once with a falchion, bits of their body are just going to fall all over the floor. So yeah, absolutely, it's a plus and minus. So let's cut to the chase, because we've been going on for long enough already. What would you choose? What would you want me to choose for you?
I hate to steal your life, but it really does depend on the context. However, taking the most generalised situation, assuming that we're doing sabre,
Yeah.
and that I'm fighting someone who is a skilled fencer rather than a bullish muppet,
Yeah.
then I would choose. I'm not still like editing my swear words. I would.
You can swear on this channel, that's fine. Fuck it.
Okay, I would choose. I would choose a slightly lighter sword. I would choose the heaviest, lighter sword that I felt that I could
So something
use.
like this, an infantry officer's sabre, something like that.
Yeah.
Are you saying you wouldn't choose a backsword?
To fight a sabre fight? No, actually, these days, no, I would fight sabre with sabre.
Backsword and sabre are almost the same weapon.
They're very similar.
But let's say the fight included
What Matt's
anyone having a
doing
sword.
now is trying to start the hypothetical fight that we were having.
No, I'm not. But so backswords tend to be heavier than sabres because they've got more metal in the hilt.
Yes, fact.
So, given that, would you choose the backsword where you've got a bigger basket guard?
I feel like I've been tricked.
Oh, so you picked the sabre?
Come into my study and I shall trap you.
And on that bombshell, folks, we found out Lucy would indeed choose the superior weapon of all one-handed weapons, the infantry officer's sabre. Cheers, folks. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, follow us on Facebook. You can buy t-shirts through Spreadshirt, support us on Patreon, or follow us on Pinterest. Thank you.